Cloudinary Image automates the image lifecycle with artificial intelligence. Our unparalleled APIs make visual experiences possible across all devices and touchpoints. To increase conversions, many of our customers easily incorporate user-generated content. Cloudinary Image. Convert shoppers to customers with transformative visual experiences.
Let's go. I'm glad to have our next speaker, Mr. Ross. I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of how this came to be. This moment right now started, I think, in 2024. We were both in Amsterdam for Perth Now, and I was doing this little thing called a hallway track where I would just invite people to come in and talk about, whatever they wanted to talk about at our conference around performance. And we both got on the mic, and he was my guest, and we just talked about some of his work. And he mentioned all the work he was doing over at Etsy around in Core Vitals, specifically LCP. And this was like over a year ago. And I always remember that conversation because I was like, wow, I didn't realize this. And we had, a sort of chit chat about that yesterday even. But I'm very delighted to have Dave join us. And he's going to talk about specifically, how things are going over at Etsy from his perspective, the work that he's been doing. And this is going to be very conversational, but again, very important because any kind of auditor in the web performance space or, contractor or someone like Erwin earlier will tell you e-com is a big deal, and it's important for e-com sites to have their experience to be as smooth as possible. And that means, in all likelihood, to get their core vitals sorted out. So we have Dave joining us. And I don't know, how do you want to start this, David?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll just kind of start by introducing myself and then get into the meat of it. I've got kind of three anecdotes that I want to dig into about Core Web Vitals. Two of them are about Etsy. One actually predates Etsy. But for myself, so I'm David Ross. I'm actually currently the engineering manager for the performance team at Etsy. Although that's a relatively recent shift. I've been a developer on the performance team at Etsy for coming up on 5 years now. And that's actually the start of it, is that looking back, Core Web Vitals is actually directly responsible for the direction that my career went in. And I find that really neat because anytime I talk with someone who's in the web performance space, nobody has the same path in. There's no predefined route that people have that get into this. And I find that really neat. Also a little bit challenging too, because it means there's no clear path of, hey, I'm interested in this, how do I get into it? But to take a step back to right when Core Web Vitals was announced, I was working for a Seattle startup at the time, RealSelf, and rotating between teams as one tends to do at a startup. At the time, I was working on the SEO team because we had a safe search domain penalty. The company did reviews for cosmetic and reconstructive surgery, and image classification still has a bit of a hard time distinguishing the intent behind a photograph. So I'm working in SEO, and Core Web Vitals gets announced. And I take notice because Google famously rarely talks about what goes into search ranking. It's very specific what they say. A lot of what they point to is the public rater guidelines doc, which was very useful. I read that thing back to front. I can't tell you how many times, but they rarely talk about what goes into search ranking, and they especially rarely talk in advance about it. So that they were posting about this, going, web performance is going to start mattering for search ranking in a year from now, I immediately took heed because, well, my charter was to improve SEO. Google made it very clear that web performance is going to start mattering for this. So I made the case to my management that we needed to have a team working on web performance, and I wanted to be on that team, which was nerve-wracking as a not quite new, but still fairly new developer to talk to my managers and go, hey, I think that we need to actually spin up an entire dev team to focus on something based on this signal that I'm receiving. So I made the case, I got approval, and actually went to the Perf Matters conference put on by Estelle Whale. And it was a fantastic conference, very early exposure to that community feeling that WebPerf has and that I really love. And it put together this idea of web performance not standing in isolation from other topics, but that performance ties to accessibility, performance ties to access, as was described earlier, that it ties into security and design and all of these very human concerns. And I found that really enriching. I really loved this idea that I could focus on something that wasn't, is this good for the business, good for the user, both, but something that is just a pure unalloyed good that everybody loves a fast website, and I could work on that. And I also got a kind of day-long getting up to speed pre-conference workshop from Tim Cadlick, and that one day might have been like one of the most dense I have getting up to speed, and from here, the rest of my career has been able to take off. And from there, I've managed to make my way over to Etsy, be an engineer there, working on performance, and now running the engineering management team, which I would not have seen myself in 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So at this point, I can point to Core Web Vitals as being the pivot point for my entire career.
Wow. Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the inflection point that was brought about by the Vitals, I think, is one that needs to be recognized, and I again, in the previous conversation, I point to Lighthouse at some point, I pointed to AMP at some point, but, I've always known that Core Vitals did play some part in people's sort of like growing interest, I'd say, at the very least, in performance. So now you've gone to Etsy and you're the lead on the performance team. Is this correct?
Engineering manager. I made the track changeover.
Yeah, excellent. So engineer manager.
It's been really interesting. Like, I didn't think I was going to go into management, but at the same time, the opportunity opened up, and it seemed like a really neat case to kind of help protect the team and kind of run cover for them and make the case for why we wanted to do the things that we identified for performance. Being able to make the case of finding targeted changes and targeted improvements, and being able to point the team at that, or really let the team go at it, go in the direction that they want themselves, because they're a very experienced team with a lot of background knowledge on the topic. So it's sometimes it feels like the team runs themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, pardon me, with regards to the team and the work that you're doing over there, and work you're doing around performance and specifically Core Web Vitals, what has that been like?
I mean, part of it has been using Core Web Vitals as kind of the floor that we aim for. Like we aim for better than the Core Web Vitals green on all the metrics, but at a minimum, we absolutely can't drop between that. And I think that's been very useful as a conversation starter, especially when you're kind of talking further up the management's line and trying to make the case for, okay, with where we're at, are we good enough? Should we be doing more? Where should we be doing more? Where should we be investing our time and efforts? We're relatively rare in being able to have a dedicated performance team, but we're not a huge team either. And compared to the many engineers that work on and for Etsy at a daily basis, there's no way that we would be able to keep up with all of the potential performance regressions or new features being added. One of the previous managers for the performance team had a quote that I paraphrasing at this point, but it's always stuck with me, about not Dan Chilton, of not wanting to be performance police, but more being performance crossing guards, and also not being performance janitors either.
Right. Crossing guards. That's actually funny. Because for those that don't know, Etsy has always had a pretty strong performance culture, at least that I remember. And man, I'm always forgetting her name. She had a book, and it came out on O'Reilly, and she was at Etsy at the time, and she was
Lara Hogan.
Bingo, that's it. I sort of remember following Etsy around that time because she was constantly talking about it. Her book was coming out, very celebrated release. And at the time as well, Etsy was very active seemingly active anyhow in sharing some of their performance culture or at least details through this Codis Craft blog that Etsy still has, by the way. You're definitely, the culture is around performance. What has it been like, sort of like, again, working with the engineers and making sure that they're on top of every single detail when it comes to performance? Because again, Etsy is a ecom in a very busy space.
Yeah, I think a lot of working with engineers around performance has been really around kind of giving them the tools to understand where they're at.
Mhm.
Because I think it's one of those things, like no engineer wants to ship slow code. Like nobody wants to make the site slower. But if you don't know that you're making it slower, then it's easy for something to slip by. And if you don't know that what you're doing might make it slower, it's easier for something to slip by. So a lot of our focus has been around providing information and tooling, so that way, if somebody runs an experiment and it slows down largest contentful paint, we're able to see that on an experiment level and notify the team. So that way, a lot of the time, they're able to go in and catch the regression before it gets deployed out to everybody. And if there's more that they like, let's say they find something to do with INP and they don't know how to debug INP, because that can take a little more fine tuning to figure out what's going on, then we encourage them to reach out to us and to talk about it on an individual level. We found that's very helpful in just kind of keeping it very person to person. It's a big emphasis with Etsy. The company slogan is to keep commerce human. And I think the human aspect of that's really important, because it would be easy to just rely entirely on automated tooling where, oh, hey, this detect LCP is up, here's a bunch of standardized guidance around it that isn't specific to the circumstances of the experiment. But by keeping that human in the loop, we're able to provide much more targeted information, which that engineer is then able to take and move forward and learn a bit more. So that way, the next experiment they run, they're already checking against what they ran into in their head, and they're already avoiding that issue in the next test.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'll sort of like also sort of get back to our first conversation, which was Turf Now. Yes, correct. In 2024, you had mentioned some of the significant work that you and your team were doing around LCP, and you had mentioned part of it was the fact that Etsy had to host and sort of work with a lot of images on the site. And is it still the case to this day?
We've gotten a lot better on it. On the variety of image size in particular, we still have, I would say, a fairly unique challenge as far as the long tail of images. We have, I can't tell you how many millions of product listings on Etsy, and it's a lot more of a long tail distribution where it's not, okay, there is the very core product that is a big portion of our business, and then smaller things. We have millions of items, which means we have billions of images, and that proliferates fairly broadly. And at the time, we had the thing that we had was with dynamic image resizing, where you could request a 350 by 350 pixel version of an image, and our CDNs would go and go and generate that size of the image. But you could also request 351 by 351 and so on. And I don't think it's too much of an assumption to state that there is probably not any user perceptible improvement to delivering a 351 by 351 image versus a 350 by 350 image. So at the time, I was doing a lot of work around trying to consolidate down to a set of approved image profiles that I had identified based on what our current traffic was, to encourage our system to do it. And we actually, in fact, developed a image component that in-house that would that developers could use, and it would kind of auto pick the image. That way it would handle things like LCP, would handle things like fetch priority, it would handle creating the source set, and it would create everything, so that way engineers wouldn't have to remember how to generate all that. But we could also use that to bake in image performance improvements site wide without each team having to do the maintenance on that.
Throughout these experiences, and trying to make sure that everything was smooth, was LCP, because I know we talked about the LCP at the time, but was LCP the one that was the most challenging out of the three vitals?
I mean, I think at the time, especially since that was before the switch into INP, now INP is something that we keep more of an eye on. I think LCP is probably has been the largest challenge of the three, although at least for Etsy, our challenge was always more with time to first buy, which isn't a core web vital, but fits into it. But the way that Etsy is structured, we're very server-side heavy, we're a PHP monolith, so time to first byte was always kind of our Achilles heel, but we made up for it with a very fast LCP. So that kind of created an interesting challenge where we were already starting a bit later because there was more server processing going on, but that meant that we could put that much more of an emphasis on getting everything else to be fast, so that way LCP would be net fast.
Oh, okay. And so to this, and you just mentioned like the INP came around post our conversation. I can't remember, it's been like that long. Is there, so at this point, do you keep sort of like your monitoring closest to the LCP? And I'm asking simply because you have a base of users that are constantly uploading images to the site.
I mean, I think LCP, it depends on, it does to an extent depend on page type. For example, our listing pages, LCP is definitely critical. It's a listing of a product, and the product image is the primary thing that our users are looking for when that page loads. So LCP is very critical there, versus something like, for example, a search page. We have a lot of listings, and one of them is going to be the LCP, but there's no one particular listing that's the most prominent one. So for something like that, interactivity becomes more important, and that's something that we've done a fair amount of fine-tuning on, understanding for each page type and also for different types of users what metrics correspond most to what's most important to that user on that page at that time.
And so, and again, you'll have to pardon me because I don't frequent Etsy enough, which I should do more. I've seen a couple of things that I've bookmarked. I'm like, yeah, I've never seen this thing. Let me just come back and check this out. Like, is there a standard page on the Etsy domain that people are like, hey, I'm trying to sell? Everyone's page is the same, or is it very customizable where you do run into these kind of challenges where you're like, okay, here we go, I got this person doing that and that person doing this? Is that part of some of the hurdles that you have to overcome?
To an extent, so it is very standardized. Sellers upload photographs, but they don't control how the listing page looks. So we have user generated content, but not user generated styling. I think that's something that does definitely make it so we have a different set of challenges than, say, for example, Shopify, which has a very different model to e-commerce, which is fascinating as well, but definitely in a different way than how we experience it.
And that being said, you've taken like one issue out of the way, which is again very important because the way I've heard Shopify engineers talk about, like, hey, they have a million details to sort of manage, and that is part of it. People creating their own layouts and whatnot, and you have a Shopify team working on core, Shopify team working on themes. Did I just say that? We're going to hear about that a little later. But moving forward, so we're in 2025, we're about to get into the next year. What is the priority right now at Etsy in performance, and certainly with regards to the vitals?
So I think As far as our priority for vitals, the big thing we're keeping an eye on is getting better at understanding what goes into INP and tracking. Like right now, our INP is fairly good. I think our Crux report had us sitting at P75 around 140 milliseconds, which is below the 200 threshold. We would, of course, love it to be better, but that's all right for now. But that's currently the metric that engineers have the most trouble understanding what goes into it. So that's something that we're working on, for example, using the enhanced attribution that was provided with the Google Web Vitals library, and using that to try to improve attribution to understand what was responsible for a given INP score for a given user session, and using that to try to improve guidance on that. And then more broadly, actually, interestingly enough, one of the things that we've been newly discovering this year is app performance. Because at the start of the year, actually, we're not just the web performance team anymore. Now we're the performance team, and we're actually also looking into, since Etsy also has iOS and Android apps, we're looking into the iOS and Android performance space and understanding what similarities are there, what unique details differ, and just kind of getting into learning what shared analysis can we find. Like, for example, does a measurement of layout shift make sense in the apps? And that's been really enlightening for me as somebody who has been primarily web focused, to kind of learn about this new domain and try to understand what can we do uniquely by having both app and web performance under one roof.
That will be very interesting, actually. Here's a question for you. So someone's been watching the stream, they've been listening to you, they see your Etsy, they're at a I don't know, small to medium e-com, and they don't have a performance team. They might be one or two people who more or less care about performance. What kind of advice would you provide them with regards to performance, but certainly with regards to how to manage the Core Web Vitals?
I think my advice there would be to look at how you communicate about performance. Like, there's a lot of ways to look at performance and track it. I mean, the Crux report is really good for competitive view, and if there's anything I've learned, like talking with higher ups and executives, they tend to be fairly competitive. Like, if you can put your performance against the performance of your competitors, that can often be a very powerful tool. I believe Speaker, for example, does their monthly dashboard where they show, like, here's how different e-commerce sites stack up, here's how different tech companies stack up. That can be really powerful, but I would kind of keep digging in with that and just trying to learn what are the challenges that whoever you're trying to convince, what are their concerns, and how does performance map to that? Because it's easy to want to care about performance for its own sake. Like, I think probably everybody on this stream would count themselves in that. I'm definitely very strong upon that, but that isn't enough on its own. So you need to find what sort of connections you can gather. So business connections, oftentimes that comes into tying it into business metrics. And many people have written about the connection between performance and sales, user behavior, all of that. And I would say trying to find what you can there can be really powerful, because if you have one example that you can point to, then it can be pretty easy to get people on your side, because, okay, you have one nugget of information that you can then expand from, and people, I think, again, are generally inclined in your favor. Like, everybody would love to have a fast website. It mostly becomes a question of at what cost, what trade-offs, how much time should we be spending on this? Does being fast mean that we aren't going to get the interactivity that we want? All of these other questions. And it becomes your job as the performance champion, the person championing performance, to look at those concerns and then tie that back into what the benefits of can be for you.
Absolutely. Awesome. Here's my last question, and this is also something that we talked about, and it went a little dormant for a while, but apparently it's back up. And you mentioned that this is part of your sort of like mandate moving forward, getting the Code is Craft blog back up and running.
Yeah, so that's something that it's been running for a while. Etsy's engineering blog, Code is Craft. It went, I wouldn't say entirely dormant, definitely slowed down for a long period. I mean, it's kind of one of those things, it's tricky to maintain, just because, getting that throughput of people submitting posts and reviewing and all of that. And that's something I've been working on. And so we have actually two relatively recent posts that are specific to performance. One, which was one that I wrote about our testing the origin trial for priority hints and fetch priority, and just kind of what led to our small part in getting that to being part of the HTML spec. And then there's a more recent one by actually one of our later speakers today that gets into our testing of speculation rules and how we're able to use that to make some pretty substantial wins in time to first buy by effectively using kind of user psychology to buy back some time. So I would definitely recommend reading through those, and I'm hoping to get many more performance. I mean, we have a lot of non-performance blog posts as well. I would definitely recommend reading it more broadly for engineering, but for performance in specific, I am definitely trying to get more posts going in that, so that way we can be contributing to the community more.
Awesome. That's fantastic news. I'm looking forward to reading those 2 blog posts, by the way, and the future ones. Now, David, someone's been super impressed with this. They're aligned with your vision, everything that you guys are doing at Etsy. They want to get in touch with you. What should they do?
I mean, professionally, I think dross@etsy.com is excellent for email. Otherwise, on Blue Sky, C. Dave Ross, similarly, C. Dave Ross at Hachyderm on Mastodon. I think those would probably be the big 3. I'm also on LinkedIn, but I'm not as fond of that, except as needed. So I think reach out to me through social media or email preferentially.
Fantastic. And, if you're sticking around, by all means, please share some of those details in the chat, whichever ones you do want to share, so that people can get in touch with you. Mr. Ross, thank you very much for your time today. That was insightful. I'm glad that we had that conversation literally 14 months ago, because it all came, back into my head. I'm like, man, I know Ross got stories. Let me bring him on. So thank you for your time. And again, it's morning, so I want to say good morning. You're in Seattle, is that correct?
Yes, Seattle. I'm working remote. Our offices are headquartered in Brooklyn, and then we also have offices in Mexico and Dublin, I believe.
Perfect. Sir, thank you much. I'm going to pull you off stage, folks. If I can just get a round of applause for David sharing his insights when it comes to Etsy and everything that they're doing over there, and the future work that they're going to share as well through their blog posts.